Hello, and welcome to Coffee on Korriban. Welcome back to the show, and I've got some very special guests with me today. I have got Master Paul and Mando on Fire of the Star Wars guys, and I'm really thrilled to have them here. They're super cool guys, and if you are not subscribed to their channel and you are subscribed to my channel, you can either unsubscribe from my channel or subscribe to their channel and stay subscribed to my channel. Because if you're a fan of Star Wars, then you should be subscribed to their channel. It's just, they've got some really awesome content, so definitely check them out. What we're going to be doing today is going over our favorite lines, our favorite quotes from Star Wars, one from each movie, plus a bonus from the shows.
All right, so I chose my lines not just because they were my favorites, but I chose lines that I thought were the most symbolic or the most applicable to real life. And so the line that I chose from episode 1 is, "Your focus determines your reality." And that's pretty self-explanatory right there, and it honestly reminds me of another saying that I heard a lot when I was in the Navy that says, perception is everything. So however you perceive whatever it is you're thinking about to be, that's pretty much going to be how it is until proven otherwise. And sort of the same thing with your focus determines your reality. Whatever it is that you're focused on about a certain situation, that's how it's going to be.
My favorite line from The Phantom Menace is when Shmi Skywalker says, "You cannot stop the change like you cannot stop the suns from setting." And I'm just going to say right now, we're not going to say these quotes perfectly because we're just kind of rolling with it. But it's a point that she's making to Anakin when he says, "I don't really want to leave you. Will I ever see you again?" And she says, "What does your heart tell you?" Yes. I hope so. I guess so.
Something like
but
that.
she's consoling him and saying that, you know, stuff is going to change in your life. You're not going to have complete control over everything. And, you know, if you can roll with those punches, you're going to be better off than trying to change the outcome for everything, which is eventually what Anakin tries to do. He tries to control everything around him, from Padme to his control over the Force, over the light side and the dark side of the Force. And, you know, his mom was basically telling him, don't try to control everything because you can't stop that change.
Yeah, and admittedly, I actually had the same line as Master Paul here. Your focus determines your reality by Qui-Gon. For similar reasons, but also kind of a more personal note on my end, because admittedly, this is something that I struggle with daily, just because being somebody who didn't do so well in college, even though that I did pretty well in high school, I developed some bad habits such as senioritis. If you are currently a high school senior, or if you former high school senior, then you know exactly what I'm talking about, where some of these bad habits such as just laziness, procrastination kind of plagued me. And thinking about this quote just kind of responds to these bad habits that I've had, which is pretty much the reason why I chose this quote.
The line that I chose from episode 2 and 3 are kind of bookends of each other. The line that I chose from episode 2, it's a whole like partial monologue that Anakin is having, and it's, "I killed them. I killed them all. And not just the men, but the women and the children too. They're like animals, and I slaughter them like animals. I hate them." And I chose that line just because that is the definitive moment to me. Not just when he's actually striking down the Tusken Raiders, but that is the definitive moment where you finally start to see Vader start to develop deep within Anakin.
Yeah, and just the fact that he was openly admitting that to Padme. And not just like, "I killed some Tusken Raiders," but like telling her that he slaughtered them all. Like that's eventually what Darth Vader would be known for, is going and killing everyone.
And just as a funny aside, the fact that she still fell in love with him after that.
Not only did he admit this, but he admit that he was wrong and having these feelings where he says, "I'm a Jedi, I'm better than this," even though Padme had says that feeling this way is human, feeling this way is normal, where Anakin responds with, "I can't, that's no excuse for me because I'm a Jedi and I'm supposed to have a moral higher standard than most people."
My quote was actually basically in the same situation, same time period, where he's burying his mom, and he's sitting there like, I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I promise, I won't let this ever happen again. I miss you so much. And that is what leads Anakin down that dark decline of basically promising his mom, I'm not going to let this happen. I'm not going to be weak anymore, because he viewed allowing his mom to die or not being there as his failure. He wasn't strong enough in the Force, and ultimately he would find that power in the dark side, which is why when Palpatine, and this will get into my next quote from Revenge of the Sith, tells him this is what the dark side offers, Anakin is ready to accept that because he wants that power for good reasons, but we all know that the dark side tempts you and it influences your mind, and eventually those darker reasons take root and take precedence over everything else.
Well, kind of going into a different direction for my episode 2 quotes. Hold off your laughs and just hear me out on this. I don't like sand. It's coarse, it's rough, it's irritating, and it gets everywhere. Now, memes aside, just hear me out on this. This actually started with a post that I saw on Instagram, I believe, where he made a commentary on how this quote has been just memed to death, but they actually took a deeper dive into what this quote meant, where they referred back to Padme's original thoughts on young life at Naboo, where she recounts also loving the water, being that she loves to swim, going to the sand, going out there to dry while counting birds, where this quote that I'm mentioning is actually supposed to be somewhat of an opposition to that, where Anakin's basically saying, I didn't have these things when I was growing up. I grew up as a slave. And when I think of sand, I just think about my rough childhood.
And in fact, I made a video called I Don't Like Sand Reimagined, and it's one of the shorts, it's under a minute, but I retold that quote, I don't like sand, it's course is everything else, but from a more novelistic standpoint. Like, if I were writing a novel, how would I write what Anakin was feeling, but in more poetic terms?
Sand was not a luxury to be enjoyed. It was a burning reminder of the cruelty of everyday life. It was coarse, just like everything there. It represented a roughness found in everyone. No one cared. No one helped.
So if you haven't seen that, go check that video out.
Okay, so like I said, my quotes from episode 2 and episode 3 are bookends of each other. And I literally just now realized this as I'm reading my quotes here. My quote for episode 3 is, from my point of view, the Jedi are evil. And not only is that where you see Anakin fully complete, at least mentally, his transformation into Darth Vader, but in a way, it's kind of like seeing in action my episode 1 quote, your focus determines your reality. Because think about it, at this point in Revenge of the Sith, Anakin has, at least in his mind, been betrayed by everyone that he loves. Mace Windu tried to kill Palpatine in front of him, the only person that he could really confide his feelings in. He, in his own head, thought that Padme had brought Obi-Wan there to kill him, as he said. Padme wasn't willing to go along with his plan of joining the dark side to save her, and so he blames all of this on the Jedi for not allowing him to A, go save his mother, or B, pursue his feelings for Padme.
My episode 3 quote is basically a two-parter. You obviously have the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, which is a classic. That would be an easy one to choose. But my line is actually, if one is to understand the great mystery, one must study all its aspects, not just the narrow, dogmatic view of the Jedi. And this is kind of Palpatine planting that seed in Anakin that, look, the Jedi don't have everything together. And then coupled with that, when he says the Jedi and the Sith are almost identical in every way, including their search for power, Anakin retorts by saying, the Jedi are selfless. The Sith think only about themselves. And Palpatine says, and the Jedi don't. So those lines together, Palpatine is coming out and blatantly saying, I am, the Lord of the Sith. I am, the dark side, and this is what you want. And instead of, I would certainly like to, instead of striking him down, he goes along with that because the seeds have been planted all along the way. That's what Palpatine means, literally, to palpate, to get your fingers on. And he's just been pulling the strings and manipulating Anakin the entire time, and it kind of just all comes out in that line.
Yeah, and to kind of go along with that, my quote was actually, "The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural," where when we first were introduced to this quote, it was almost like Palpatine was baiting Anakin, as Coffee on Korriban had said, and also we see this quote again in Episode 9. Now, whether you love or hate this movie is completely irrelevant, but here's the point, where he's basically having a double meaning with this quote, where first it was about, oh, look at the dark side, we have all this good stuff, we can probably save your wife. And then when we go to Episode 9, on the other hand, it's almost like the cheat of death was fulfilled through Palpatine, since out of nowhere, Palpatine just somehow returned.
Alright, so my quote for Episode 4 is another pretty self-explanatory one, and it's, "Who's the more foolish, the fool or the fool who follows him?" And this is another one that can easily be applied to real life, basically just saying, one person leads another into a bad situation. Who's the stupider person? The person who got them into the situation, or the other person that followed them into that bad situation?
That reminds me of the verse, the two blind men, the blind leading the blind, and they both fall in the ditch.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Also, kind of on a side note, I believe this was actually one of those little Clone Wars little fortune cookies that Dave Filoni had put into the Clone Wars. I forget which episode it was, but I know it's there, just as a heads up. Feel free to comment below which episode that was, by the way.
My line from Episode 4 is, "The Force is what gives a Jedi his power. It surrounds us and penetrates us and binds the galaxy together." And it just, that's the titular quote that sums up the Force. Whenever you want to describe the Force, that's the line that you go to. And it's kind of the core of what Star Wars is. The Force is in everything and through everything. And by extension, the will of the Force, is what the Jedi can tap into, much like Christians, allow the will of the Holy Spirit to guide their lives.
And something about midichlorians.
And something about midichlorians as well. and the wills, and they had a journal, and...
Yeah. And then, with that out of the way, it kind of goes into the same conversation with my quote, because I have down the quote where Obi-Wan was talking about before the dark times, before the Empire. Because place yourself in 1977 when Star Wars had first come out, without any knowledge of the prequels and everything that Star Wars is today. This quote was actually the first look at what the past before the Empire was, because just like Luke had pretty much known everything about what Star Wars was the Empire existing, so did you as the audience. But with that quote of the Clone Wars before the Empire came in, you got some idea of what life was like before the Empire.
And I think another thing that's interesting on that point is I take for granted the fact that we know the backstory of how the Empire came about. We know what happened in the Clone Wars. We know all the characters and the rise of Darth Vader, and how the Empire and Emperor Palpatine came into power. But there was none of that during the original trilogy. And for me, coming into my love for Star Wars after the prequels were already out, I think that gets lost on me a lot of times. And it's something that's really incredible that they made 1, 2, and 3 to fill in the backstory on basically that line exclusively, which is pretty cool.
See you next week.